So welcome everyone. My name is Michelle and I'm so proud to have Kathy Cecil with us today. I've had the pleasure of working directly with Kathy both at Advocacy and now in her position. She's been there for a little while now. She's just kicking butt as the
Mm,
director of Springhill Pool Trust, and I'm so proud of the association. So I know that so we just heard that Advocacy administers these trusts and Springhill administers these trusts. So why are we doing this together? Well,
mhm,
because it's a collaboration, and so um, we serve different populations, different communities, different people with different types of assets. Um, and so there's always room. There's so many people that need this help. So there's so much confusion around pooled trusts
mhm.
that, and I wanted to make sure that Kathy had a chance to shine because it is an underutilized resource and it is not limited to Michigan, although most of the participants are in Michigan. And I forgot to mention, which is really important, I have been counsel for Springhill for about 12 or 13 years now. And so it's been a really great association. So I make sure that just to be clear, and I tell this to all my clients because I do refer a ton of people over to Springhill. I don't benefit financially from people joining the trust, and so this is not a promotion. This is just good advice, right? And so with that, as Maddie mentioned, we're going to just set the stage basically and try and, before we dive into all the ins and outs of pooled trust, you have to know what it is that we're talking about. So if you know what that is and you're really familiar and you want to hear more about Springhill and skip this part on the recording, you can do that. So um, we're going to go through some of the elements of a pooled trust and my recommendations about when I really love to use pooled trusts and the different types. So there's a couple different types out there. And then we'll make sure that we, kind of ditch the PowerPoint, and then we're just going to have a nice conversation with Kathy and make sure that any questions that you might have, Maddie will be able to voice those at that time. And so Kathy has been the executive director of the Spring Hill Pooled Trust for a number of years now. Gosh, Kathy, how long has it been?
Going on 3 years.
Is it really?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. So Kathy's profession before that, she was a realtor, a very successful realtor for primarily, I want to say, residential real estate. Is
Yes.
that right?
Mhm.
And so it's amazing how transferable that skill is in this setting. And so she's just really excelled both in that profession and now kind of directed toward assisting people with disabilities through Spring Hill. So we're very, very happy to have her today.
Thank you for having me.
So why does why does this matter? Why are we talking about this? Who is this for? Well, if anybody's receiving a settlement, if you're receiving an inheritance, that like for instance, if somebody has named you and you're a person with disabilities and they've named you as the beneficiary in a life insurance policy or as an account, an IRA, a 401k, any of these things, sometimes people mean well and they don't really plan ahead of time, and it's kind of a DIY estate plan, and they don't really, or things change. Maybe they did it a long time ago and then since then something has happened where now you're disabled and you're receiving this money. And so that's where special needs trusts in general are really helpful. They're really a fantastic way to make sure that you maintain eligibility and are able to set money aside for your future needs. And so it's also for people who might be receiving benefits like Social Security, disability, and Medicare. There's additional Medicaid benefits that need protecting. Sometimes people with disabilities, you may be assisting a loved one that just needs help managing the money. And having a pooled trust is a way to perhaps kind of, for a very economical way, one, it's possible that you may avoid probate and the fees associated with probate by putting funds in a pooled trust. And if it's in a probate estate, it's not protected.
Mhm.
So if you're in a guardianship, conservatorship, or even a decedent estate, those assets are countable. And so a pooled trust does more than just really preserve public benefits. It's a way to get professional assistance managing money. And so that's why I really love doing special needs planning in general and using the tools that we have available to help people live a better life. And so what happens if nothing, like you don't do anything, you don't plan? Well, you definitely could lose your SSI, your income, your health insurance, your Medicaid, your attendant care or CLS hours, your waiver benefits, things that help keep you independent in the community. There's also Medicare savings plans that help pay for Part B premiums, that pay for the 20% that Medicare doesn't cover, food assistance, housing assistance. So all the stuff that meets your basic needs, you could lose without planning. And so hopefully you find this helpful, whether it's for yourself or for a loved one or somebody that you care about, to be able to give them some more resources. So the other things are that, there's court delays. Again, probate estates, setting this up properly. Anytime you're in probate court, it's a relatively expensive, could be a very expensive process that takes a long time. Again, you want to preserve benefit eligibility and prevent overspending, right? And this is like, I call it, have you ever gone bowling with bumpers, right? You can still throw the ball, but you're going to throw a lot more strikes and you won't end up in the gutter. And that's really what a good trustee will do, is give you some latitude, help you live a good life without having their thumb on you, right? That's not the point of this. And I think some of the misconceptions about special needs trust in general, that they're really restrictive. In fact, it's the exact opposite. A special needs trust can do everything except really pay you cash. That's a hard no for most providers, if not all. The other is to make sure that while your basic needs are met by perhaps government benefits, it's meant to enhance your life. And so what does that mean? It can pay for anything. It can pay any bill, any good or service that makes a difference in your life. And so hopefully the money lasts a little bit longer too. So, but basically a pooled special needs trust is a type of special needs trust. It's treated as an exempt resource. So those are magic Social Security words for it doesn't count, right? And so that's how you use. So we'll get into how you get to use your money for and how you get to benefit from that. Do you have anything to add at this time, Kathy? Anything else you want to say?
Not really, but I think you hit all of the main points. And one thing that I'm not sure if you mentioned or not is, these funds are yours and they're for your sole benefit. And again, our goal is not to take your money away. Our goal is to make sure that we manage it properly so that you don't lose your benefits.
And it lasts as long as possible. I
Mhm,
didn't bring up the sole benefit thing. So I
mhm,
think that that's an important piece of things. So this is something, sometimes people want to save money for others, like a future inheritance for their kids. But how do you deal with that when you have that kind of a question, Kathy?
Yeah, and I think so many parents, I mean, parents with special needs kids, this whole entire process is overwhelming. And they make decisions because they think that they're making the best decisions for their children, but they may not understand if the decisions they're making could jeopardize their kids' Medicaid or SSI benefits that they're receiving. And one thing we'll talk about later on also, specifically, we're one of the only pooled trusts in Michigan that offers first party and third party options. So first party is, the beneficiary's own money. Third party is essentially the opposite. It's the dollars of anyone other than the beneficiary. So we may have a parent that's working on an estate plan. They're thinking they're doing the best thing for their child by leaving them this money, but by doing that, they could be jeopardizing the support system that's helping them. So by setting up a third party pooled trust, you can name it directly in the estate plan, and then upon the parent's passing, that inheritance will go directly into the third party pooled trust, and it'll be protected, and they'll protect their child's benefits as well.
Mhm. Yeah. we'll go into more specifics about that, but I'm glad that you brought that up because I think that again, it's a very underutilized resource
Mhm,
among probate and estate planners. So when we're talking about special needs trust administration, a lot of people, when they're meeting with an estate planning attorney, the default is a family member. And that can work out well. But in my opinion, I think people are really busy. They already have a number of roles that they're filling, whether it's taking care of, they have a spouse, they have work, they have their own kids, they may have parents that are also and in-laws. There's so many things that were already stretched so thin. And then, oh, here's another job for you to do. And
mhm,
it's complicated. Oh, and the rules change all the time. So
mhm,
it's really trying to set families up for success. And so special needs trust administration, it provides protection for the individual. So one, we talked about that, where maybe they can't manage their own finances. Even if there's really no issues with intellectual, they may be subject to being vulnerable, subject to suggestion, where they want to be generous, and anybody who asks them for money, they will give money. So this is a way to put boundaries and protections in place, and that's what a good special needs trust administrator will do. And with a
mhm,
pooled trust, that is always a nonprofit. We'll go through why that is.
mhm,
The other aspect is that funds, we call them assets, right? But any kind of money that's held in a special needs trust continues to make somebody allow someone to access both. I have Medi-Cal, and that's the California Medicaid policy, but any kind of SSI, Medicaid, waiver, independent living supports,
mhm,
SNAP benefits, anything that where people are asking for your income or what you own, Section 8, all of those, it safeguards it.
mhm,
It's the only type of trust that's allowed. So you can sometimes they're called safe harbor, sometimes they're called different things.
mhm,
And an improperly administered SNT. So this is why I really love working with professional administrators. And this is I have an admitted bias in this direction because I've seen it when it goes wrong,
mhm,
and I like not piling on. Somebody, a parent the other day, talked about the burden that they are reluctant to pass on to a neurotypical child or the responsible child.
mhm,
And I think that's a real thing and something that people are hesitant. So there's like the care aspects that you want to set families up for success and not give them, that's already a job. So taking some of that heavy lifting off of the compliance that's required is a big deal. And so Kathy mentioned this in her comment that what happens if you make a mistake as a special needs trustee? Well,
mhm,
there could be a loss of income.
mhm,
You may have to pay it back out of what? The money's been spent. You
mhm,
may lose benefits, either temporarily or even permanently. You may, uh, and that's just the income side. It can also, it directly impacts the ability to get healthcare and certainly any kind of attendant care or support. Your housing is compromised. So this is not an area to be taken lightly. This is not like, you know, nominating your child to do your own revocable living trust. This is a completely different job and
right.
it goes on for decades. This is a long-term
Commitment.
relationship.
Yeah. Mhm.
And
And
so,
and I'd also like to add, you know, parents will leave a family member or sibling as trustee. And again, you mentioned the responsibility, but one other thing you mentioned is the guidelines and the rules are changing constantly. I think that's the one thing that we know for certain is changes among us. And to have a professional trustee that understands the changes in Social Security guidelines, and, you know, if an individual is receiving SSI and they need help with housing, different options or tools that we have in order to manage that situation to help them, where a family member may not be able to understand the changes or keep up with them.
mhm, that's a great point. Absolutely. And I know that you As the director of Springhill Pool Trust, you take that education very seriously and go to all kinds of professional events to make sure that you're up on the latest changes. And so
Mm,
I think that's really important because a family member just really has no chance of doing that
mhm,
because they aren't in that community. It's a profession. And
mhm,
so I think that's one of the many benefits of being involved with a professional, but especially a pool trust administrator.
mhm,
So there's different types of special needs trusts. So the first one that is the most common is a third party special needs trust. And that basically means that anyone except the beneficiary can establish this type of a trust. It can be funded with anyone's money as long as it is not the beneficiary's money. It can be it is for the beneficiary,
mhm,
but it is not the beneficiary's money. So if they get an inheritance that's like naming directly, like naming them individually on a life insurance policy,
mhm,
instead of naming the person as an individual, you would name the trustee of their third party special needs trust. So say John Doe third party special needs trust, or if you're going to use the third party, so we're going to talk about Spring Hill's third party trust in just a second.
mhm,
So the beneficiary designation would be John Doe's, you know, third party, Spring Hill third party special needs trust, right?
mhm,
That's the beneficiary. So why? That's how a life insurance company knows who to make the check payable to.
mhm,
And what happens there? No disruption of benefits. And so when we talk about we'll talk about the legal requirements in a second, but that's the difference between a third party and a first party trust. We always ask, whose money is it? Is it the beneficiary's money or is it someone else's money? So when it's someone else's money, that means parent, grandparent. It could even mean GoFundMe, fundraising events. We see this all the time. Um, the spaghetti dinner to raise money for someone's cancer treatments. This is a great place to use that. And the easiest way to set that up would be using the Spring Hill third party pool trust. The organizer of the event just sets that up. And when you're at the fundraiser, if people are writing checks, they write the check to the third party special needs trust for the benefit of the individual. So
mhm,
those are just some of the ways that that can be used. And then it's not the individual who's getting the money, it goes directly to an independent fiduciary whose job it is to safeguard that money for the benefit of that disabled person.
And I'd like to add also with the third party pool trust, when it's specifically called out in the estate plan or as a beneficiary of a life insurance policy, that check, if it's mistakenly mailed to the beneficiary, if it's made out to Spring Hill third party pool trust, they can't deposit it in their account. But of course, you're going to get a check, you're going to see your name on it and try to deposit it. And that just protects them to make sure that it gets deposited and it's protected in the trust.
Yeah. And so it helps prevent mistakes.
Mhm,
Let's go through the rest of the chart. So that's the third party special needs trust. And when that's talking about that top line, that's a custom drafted, standalone third party special needs trust to me is the gold standard.
mhm,
You can have a legally sufficient third party special needs trust in a couple of lines in an estate plan. Is that the best practice? No. So if that's what's in your estate plan, check it. You should look at that and
right.
consider, is this good enough? Is this what I want? Does this meet my loved one's needs? And have it reviewed. So just as a little practice tip. First party D4A special needs trust. I know all of these statutory references, that's just what we call it. That is a custom drafted first party special needs trust. And for me, I don't consider those trusts, I don't draft those trusts unless you're looking at least $400,000 in assets. And that's in addition to any kind of real property like a home.
Mhm,
Why? Because it's a custom drafted trust. There's got to be sufficient money there so that the cost of administration doesn't wipe the trust out, right?
mhm,
It's always looking out for what's an economical choice for the beneficiary.
mhm,
And for me, in my law practice, this will surprise some practitioners, I think, that anything under 400,000, really my first choice is always a pool trust.
mhm,
Why? because you have professional administration, they're usually, for me, anything under that amount, they really do benefit from the investments pools and the pooled investments, and we'll talk about that more specifically in a minute.
Mhm.
But these trusts, the first party trust can be created by the individual themselves as long as they have legal capacity, a parent, grandparent, guardian, or court. And so the biggest differences between these two, like let's just talk about the D4A versus the D4C. So first of all, you might be thinking, well, you've got an A trust and a C trust. Is there a B trust? Yes, there is a D4B trust, but it's not recognized by the state of Michigan. It might be recognized in your state. So the state of Florida, they're called Miller trusts. New York has them. There are different states that do utilize them, and they're typically where someone has too much income to qualify for a Medicaid benefit. And so that's typically where those are used. And so Michigan doesn't recognize those, so I'm not going to spend any time on those today. But the difference between D4A and a D4C is primarily that one, you must be under age 65 for a D4A. That's that custom trust, that custom drafted trust. With a D4C pool trust, there are a great many states, including Michigan, that if you are over age 65 and you put money in a pool trust, you will have a loss of benefits. There will be a penalty assessed. However, if you're on SSI, no penalty. That's something that's evolved and changed fairly recently. If you are in Michigan and you are not in a skilled nursing facility, meaning you're living independently or in the community, you have disabilities, and you are over age 65, there's no penalty. The penalty is where you're on type of Medicaid benefits that provides care. So whether it's PACE, waiver, nursing home, then they tend to penalize you.
Mhm.
So that's where I know, Kathy, that we get a lot of questions about that from practitioners.
Yes.
So I know it can be a little confusing, right? Because these rules are, they're complicated and they're not
Correct.
necessarily logical. So
Mhm.
the other big difference is that on a D4A trust, there's an automatic, anything left after the person passes away, automatically whatever's left goes to the state of Michigan or whatever state, however many states that you've received Medicaid benefits in. There's an
Mhm.
automatic rate of recovery. With the D4C pool trust, I know Springhill and many trusts have an automatic right where anything left stays with the nonprofit to help further the nonprofit mission. So, Kathy, um, I know what's can be an important deciding factor for people is that they would rather leave money to the nonprofit than the state anytime people have a choice.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about how Spring Hill works with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So with our joinder agreement, they have the opportunity to have their remaining balance upon their passing. It can be retained by the trust. And we're managed by Spring Hill Housing Corporation, Nonprofit Housing Corporation, which is a 501c3. They're Spring Hill Pool Trust trustee. So when they leave the money with the trust, what we do is, I report to a board of directors as well. So when we do our annual budget, we'll look at that balance and we'll use a percentage. And we've started the Spring Hill Community Fund. So the first year I reached out to different nonprofits or referral sources that we use and say, hey, can you share some nonprofits that support people with disabilities that are just doing an amazing job that really help your business? And so I got a list of those nonprofits. I reached out to them and said, what kind of programs are you working on? Is there any additional funding that you need? And then we developed a grant application. So we've given out, I believe we approved 10 grant applications last year and 7 the year before. Something different that we're doing for the next fiscal year are the organizations that have received grant funds from the Spring Hill Community Fund. I'm reaching out for an impact statement just so that we can share with the community and our beneficiaries that these resources are available to them. But once a nonprofit organization gets a grant from our fund, they in turn need to respond with a suggestion for another nonprofit to get the funding for the next year, just so that we can expand our reach and expand our resource pools for our beneficiaries.
I think that's so important when people, understand that the money that might be left to the nonprofit
Mhm,
just gives back to the community and is
mhm,
reinvested in the community to specifically help with other people who have disabilities. And it's not just going to, I don't know, a waste, or it's going to pay additional salaries. That doesn't feel satisfying to people. So
mhm.
thank you for sharing that. I think that's really important that people have an understanding of like how, if money's left, where does it go? What does it do? And so it's already more satisfying to have it go to a nonprofit, but then to know that it's being done to really add jet fuel to these important programs that people just they need access to this.
Yeah, and
I
at
think that's
times
really
it can
great.
get yeah, at times it can get very overwhelming because there are so many nonprofits. So I thought, what a better way than to the people that are receiving the grant funding to saying, no, this is an amazing nonprofit. They're really doing amazing work in supporting our community.
Absolutely. We've talked about the pool trust and kind of what it is in a big picture concept, but it's really a technique for drafting. So instead of having a trust that's drafted for a particular person or family, it's a it's called a master trust agreement where it's written for to protect people of a certain type. So in this scenario, we're talking about people who have disabilities. And so it was really created and outlined many years ago now. These have been in place since what the late 90s. And Springhill was one of the first in the country. And so it's been in place and it's just really grown since then. And so you can think of it kind of like a savings account basically where you can put your money and it's safeguarded. And so that master pooled trust is the document that outlines the rules about how your funds are going to be managed on your behalf. And anyone can join who fits the criteria. So, for a person with special needs, you have to have disabilities. You can't just join it if you're on health insurance, Medicaid for low income. It has nothing to do with disabilities. You can't use this trust just to protect your Medicaid eligibility. You have to be a person with disabilities. And so there are different types of pooled trust. So there's, as Kathy mentioned, Spring Hill is one of the only ones in Michigan that has a third party pool trust option. That means if someone else wants to leave money for a person with disabilities, it's a very economical way to do that. They can just sign a joinder agreement, which is basically a contract saying that, yep, I want the money, either that we're going to give it now
Mhm,
or we're going to leave it in the future and name that trust, that sub account as a beneficiary on a life insurance policy, on a as a beneficiary designation on an account, to be able to safeguard, protect, help support, and manage funds for a person with disabilities.
mhm,
So for legal requirements for what we call a D4C, remember that's where it's the beneficiary's own money,
mhm,
it must be irrevocable, which theirs is, right? It has to be established and managed by a nonprofit association. It's not specific in the rules, but in the POMS, it does. POMS are the Social Security Administration policies. It is a 501c3 typically that you will see do these. There's a number across Michigan, but I'm counsel for Spring Hill and it's my favorite. So can I say,
mhm,
certainly in Michigan. And so a separate account. So your money is pooled with others for purposes of investment, but your money stays your money. You can't use someone else's money. If you put $100,000 in, you will see an account that looks like, it's just your money, right? And so it can be established by the person themselves as long as they have legal capacity. So you have to be over the age of 18 and not under a guardianship or conservatorship. A parent, a grandparent, a legal guardian, or a court. So children of a person with disabilities need a court order. Um, Siblings, same thing. You're not one of the listed people. I'm not quite sure why, but You're just not on the list, so you can't do it. It would require a court order to do that in the probate court. And then we talked about what happens with residue, meaning anything that's left after a person passes away. Springhill's policy is that it's retained by the trust, and you can hear the good things that does. It kind of supercharges the community organizations that might be hands-on providers or do other things in the community to help people with disabilities. Is that normal? Is that something that you should ask about when you're looking at who do you select as a pooled trust? If you're looking at this as either an attorney who's referring somebody, or you are as the individual themselves or a family member, you're looking at what pooled trust do I use? Ask these questions. You should ask these questions. Be a good consumer. And so this is where we've got Kathy highlighted here. But if you're in a different state, and you're like, oh, I really want to use one that's in my state. You should be asking these questions.
Mhm.
And so Kathy, actually, does Spring Hill accept people who are not in the state of Michigan?
We absolutely do. And you had mentioned in the earlier slide that in regards to the different states that an individual was living in, if they were receiving public benefits,
Mhm.
upon their passing, when we close the trust, we just need to, well, part of our process is we reach out to Medicaid to determine if there's a lien on if they owe money to Medicaid. And we just have to go back to Medicaid and we need to point out each state that the individual lived in.
Yep. And
And
where they
what
receive
other,
benefits.
yeah. And another collaboration that I'm a part of is the Alliance of Pool Trust. And this is a a collaboration of different pooled trusts throughout the country because as you mentioned there are different guidelines for different states, so it's just such a wonderful resource. They have a listserv that you can ask questions and say, hey, this is how we do this in our state, this is what I was thinking of doing, does anyone have any other, can we brainstorm and think of maybe a better way to do it. And so it's a wonderful resource. And typically, for example, let's say if someone comes to me from Ohio and wants to open a pool trust, I have individuals and partnerships that I could reach out to see what those specific needs are for that
Mhm.
specific state.
So let's talk about why it's called a pooled trust. So pooled special needs trust. So special needs trust, we've talked about the fact that it's an exempt resource. It's protected. Government entities, Social Security, HUD, SNAP, Medicaid, they can know about it. They need to know about it, but they don't count it when they're
Right.
looking at financial eligibility for those benefits. But why is it called a pooled trust?
It's actually called a pooled trust because, well, currently we have 335 sub-accounts and we manage roughly 16 million in assets. So we work with TrueLink Financial Services, and they are a financial services provider that specializes in special needs trusts. And what they do, again, as you mentioned, when you open a pooled trust, that is your money, your separate money. But what TrueLink does is they pool all of the funds together to invest it in the hopes that you would get a greater return on your investment.
So I think that if anybody has something like $50,000,
Mhm,
that's a lot of money. But when
mhm,
you invest $50,000, it's hard to get access to the types of funds, the return, the
mhm,
safety. So these investments are conservative, but they have a consistent growth. So you're not going to see huge, 20% returns because that where you see big growth, it's a lot of risk. So that's where you see values go up and down. And so everybody here in this situation is in the same boat, which is all their money in the world is in this fund.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
so I know that the investment policies are conservative, but there's power in money when it's consolidated like that. And
Mhm,
so I know that historically, Spring Hill has done extremely well on these investments where, again, you don't see like huge gains, but you don't see losses. And that's really important to people.
mhm.
Is
And we have
that
to
there's a
remember
consistent
too,
growth.
Michelle. Yeah, I'm sorry. We have to remember that the market's volatile. It
Hmm.
goes up and down, it ebbs and flows. One very exciting thing that last year, we switched to a diversified, multiple diversified portfolios. So we worked with TrueLink Financial. We have conservative, moderate, and a moderate portfolio. So at the beginning, when we transferred everything over, we needed to first determine, okay, what's the best bucket to put each
Mm.
beneficiary into? Because again, it's their individual money. And then TrueLink comes up with a formula and with a variety of factors. It has to do with, the age of the beneficiary, the balance of the trust. We go back and look at a 12-month history of distributions that they made. Maybe if they have a large purchase coming up. So
Mhm.
they utilize this formula to determine which of the diversified portfolios would work best for them and they would get the best rate of return. Because as a trustee, Springhill has a fiduciary responsibility to manage those assets for them.
I think that's a really exciting development so that
Mhm.
it makes sense where if somebody is, older, they're going to, need more stability, not as much growth because they're going to
Right.
be using it, right?
Mhm.
If somebody has a high usage, putting them in a high growth, they can't kind of let it sit and cook and grow.
Right.
And so I like that there's this one, it's kind of less decision making for the people, but there's these factors that kind of systematize and really try to maximize the amount of return in a safe, stable way
Mhm.
for the beneficiaries
Yeah,
so
and
that
I'd like
they're
to add
maximizing it.
also, the first step of our intake process is just having a phone conversation with the beneficiary, learning about their disabilities, learning about the support that they need, how long they want the money to last, what their expenses are. So we take all that information also, and from that first interview, we'll communicate the information that we can, the non-confidential information to TrueLink, and then they'll use that to develop which direction they want to go and which portfolio they want to go to.
That's really exciting. That's a
Mm.
huge development. So if you're considering and you're shopping as a consumer, what type of pooled trust or which provider you want to work with, how they handle investments is a really important question. I know some use like stacked CDs,
Mhm.
others have different methods. And so it's an important question to ask when you're considering who do you want to work with if you're working with a pooled trust provider. So, what makes it a special needs? So, this is where, again, we're kind of taking apart the name pooled special needs trust. Well, as we talked about, only people with disabilities are eligible to become members of the pooled trust um, as long as it's first party. If it's third party, you don't have to have a disability determination. This is something that if people, parents out there or estate planners, you're hearing you're hearing certain words from your client that they're concerned about. Somebody needs assistance managing money. They may have some deficits or some areas of concern where perhaps they have addiction issues or other types of issues. Maybe they have some behaviors that need some boundaries. They need the bumpers when they go bowling. They need or the virtual ones when we're talking about the role of a pooled trust administrator to keep them on the straight and narrow, keep them out of the gutter, keep them out of trouble. And so this is where if you're hearing those, the failure to thrive, failure to launch, and maybe they have some stuff that whether diagnosed or undiagnosed, people with disabilities work all the time, right?
Mhm.
And we all have certain behaviors. But if a parent, as a practitioner, if you're hearing that, as a sibling or even a person themselves, if you're doing planning for someone else, this is a perfect use for a third party pool trust. Again, with that guideline of, if you're around 400,000, and that's not counting any kind of real property, that's
Mhm.
the kind of cash that needs to be managed. A pooled trust is an incredibly um, useful tool for professional administration at the lowest, most economic cost possible. And then we have like the built-in investment portfolio that it will accommodate whatever specific circumstance that person is in, along with that's in aligned with their goals. So if their goals are just to have it last their whole lifetime, well, okay, then they go and that's a factor. If it's a relatively small amount of money and they want it to make a difference to maybe subsidize their transportation, like to always be able to afford car insurance and maintenance or a home, and they have a specific goal on that they want it for that use, then it guides how those investments are done. Now, why I like a pooled trust for that, that's kind of like my general guideline about assets under management. Because if you're significantly over that, I think it's enough money that it really warrants an individual spending plan with their own investment guidelines and portfolio. Anything less than that, I think, is ripe for especially the use of a pool trust. Can it go over that? Can you leave $20 million in this and using a pooled special needs trust? Yes, you can. I have seen that.
Mhm.
I wouldn't particularly do that, but it's possible. There's no limits. It's just my best practices as a practitioner and how I do that. So reasonable minds may differ, right? Professional opinions and approaches differ.
And I'd like to add also, if you would like to reach out to me, and we'll go over my contact information at the
Mhm.
end of the webinar, that's at that free consultation. I know this can be very overwhelming. Which one do I choose? What direction do I go? So, at that individual free consultation, we'll go over your individual circumstances. And, there might be a situation where Spring Hill is a great option for you. Or if you come to me and you have under $19,000, I might refer you to a MyAble account. And yeah, we could. I know that you have an entire webinar dedicated to the MyAble account.
Uh-huh.
Um, or if they come to me with unique assets, or it's a very, very large dollar amount, then I would reach out to you, Michelle, and say, this is the circumstance, these are the factors. What's your opinion? What way should we go? So there are different choices, but I'd be more than welcome to walk you through those with your individual situation.
Yeah, I think one of the ways that we've um, also a little bit more creatively used and leveraged the professional administration of a pooled trust is where we
Mhm,
had a higher dollar value of an established third party custom drafted trust
mhm,
that a family member was a trustee and they wanted to stay trustee, which is fine,
mhm,
right? But they were concerned about having to be responsible for the day-to-day administration. And so this was a third-party trust. And so what they did was they established, or in the process of establishing a pooled third-party trust that the trust that they manage makes a distribution to. Now, I'm not talking $2,000 a month because that's not a good use of a resource like Spring Hill, but it's like one annual payment of say $50,000, right?
mhm,
Or $25,000 that they want, okay, beneficiary, this is your annual budget. And they're going to put it in the pooled trust to be able to have one separation, excellent record keeping,
mhm,
and two, there's additional support for the beneficiary where
mhm,
it's not them calling their sibling who's the family member. It makes the administration, even on a larger trust, a little bit easier on particularly a family member trustee. So what I'm trying to get across is that on a practitioner side, this is an opportunity for some creativity. There's no limits on how you can possibly use this or integrate this. And if you get a little too creative, you might get some pushback, but
mhm,
you can layer. There's no one saying that, oh, someone can only have one special needs trust. That's actually not true. I think the record I've ever heard of is I think for what a single beneficiary is 10. I don't recommend that. But
mhm,
but you can even think about using a third party pool trust to layer and to add additional resources and administrative support, perhaps to a family member who's maybe on the higher end of the dollar amount,
mhm.
right? And have a fairly significant, perhaps annual or semi-annual distribution. And so just please don't do $2,000 a month, and because Kathy will kill me. But that's just something that, it is something to consider, like that maybe a practitioner and estate planner maybe wouldn't have thought of.
Right, right. And I'd like to add also, I mean, we work in conjunction with MyAble also, because
Mhm.
the beautiful factor of MyAble is it gives beneficiaries the independence. If you open a MyAble account, we'll sit down with the beneficiary and we'll say, okay, what's a monthly budget amount that we can put onto your Able into your Able account? But the Able account gives them a Visa debit card. So if they want to go get their hair done or get their nails done, or they like to go to restaurants, they don't have to submit distributions for all that. We can kind of put them on that budget that they agree with, and it just gives them the independence that they're so happy with at the end of the day.
I think that's a really key tool, to allow people to feel that sense of empowerment and
Mhm.
right to choose. That if you're going to go buy some clothes, or you want to get a haircut, you want to go to the movies, you have the ability to do that and pay for it
Right,
like a grown up. This is
right.
and we'll kind of circle back to what you said earlier, which is this is your money.
Mhm.
And so this is a way, one of the big techniques um, that Spring Hill uses to help people have agency over their own money. So I think that's a really important issue, because that's, of course, one of the hugest choices, which is how do I use it? Right.
Right, right. And our number one goal, I mean, our tool is here to protect the money. It's not to take it from the beneficiary.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great philosophy in general that you're there to serve, and help protect, but not, they don't need a parent. That's not what your role is. Right. And
Right.
so this is just a nice little recap. When is a pool trust the right choice? Right. We talked about kind of the dollar value involvement. Um, Certainly, if you're on SSI, Medicaid waiver, Medicare savings programs, or Section 8, SNAP, maybe not just for SNAP, but if you're getting any combination of those benefits, to
Mhm,
me, and you're getting under 400,000, automatically, without question, pool trust is my tool of choice.
mhm,
Particularly if you're getting a settlement or an inheritance directly, that's a D4C, right? Because it's the beneficiary's money, just
mhm,
to kind of anchor that. Um, However, if someone else is planning to leave money for a person with disabilities, that's that third party pool trust. So again, we can do a custom drafted trust. I really don't like a trust within a trust. So like a special needs provision within a revocable living trust, for someone who has a known disability. I don't love that planning. And I would always prefer a pooled third party trust for an economical estate plan. This is particularly helpful for families of modest means. And modest is, I would say, a house, an account, maybe a small life insurance policy, whatever you think modest is. I don't have a kind of a litmus test there, but you have to think about what are the economies of what's going to be required to administer what's left in an appropriate, safe way. And so I did write an article with my husband Kevin Urbach. It was published a little while ago for the American Bar Association, but it still holds true. And so it was their magazine article is called, it's for Bifocal Magazine, but it's available to you. It's in the comments. There's a link for it as well. So it gives you a little bit more from an estate planner's perspective. And so if you're an estate planner or you're working with an estate planner and they haven't mentioned that to you and you want to explore that, give them the article, you read the article, and certainly consider Spring Hill third party pool trust as a resource, because it's a wonderful tool that's very economical as a very effective estate plan, without, for people who may not need a 10 or $15,000 estate plan, and that's a lot of people.
mhm.
So this is a very effective way to help plan and protect somebody.
And Michelle, I'd like to add one thing on that side as well.
Sure.
We talked about the $400,000. What's the max, that you would be really thinking that the pool trust would be the right decision. I want to talk about the minimum also, because not
Great call.
everyone's, receiving inheritances or settlements. We have individuals that have court-appointed guardians or professional guardians, and their main responsibility is to ensure that their clients with SSI and Medicaid are staying under that $2,000 threshold. So there are times that we open pooled trust with $1,000 because so they'll open them with $1,000, and then every month, they're trying to, again, to manage those assets to keep them under the 2,000, to keep them eligible for SSI and Medicaid. So we open those as well.
That's a great thing
Mm.
that you're pointing out. And I know that, if there's an opportunity to utilize a more economical, even more economical way, that's where able accounts are pulled in. I just want to remind people that the state of Michigan, if you are on SSI,
Mhm.
your asset limit is still $2,000.
Mhm.
If you are on any other benefit other than supplemental security income,
Mhm.
then your asset limit is 9,660. So that was a change that was effectuated earlier this year by the state of Michigan. If you are anywhere else, that will not be this true for you. That is only in the state of Michigan, and that is consistent with the Medicare savings plans. That is their resource limit or asset limit. So that's the amount of cash that you can have on hand. And so again, this is where keeping up, just when you think you've got the rules down, something
They
changes.
change.
It always changes,
Right.
right? And so
Right.
that catches people by surprise. So again, that is for Michigan only. That
Okay.
is for Michigan Medicaid programs only. So again, if you're on, this is not to be confused with SSI. And if you have $1 of SSI eligibility,
Mhm.
then you're at $2,000 resource limit. What are some of the pros and cons that you hear about, people using a pooled trust versus the other types of trusts that we talked about?
Um, well, again, I think we go back to, in my mind, I see three levels, and it all starts with that dollar amount. If a family comes to me and they have a loved one with a disability, and I listen for the dollar amount. So if it's under 19,000, I introduce the MyAble account to them and say, this might be a great option for you. But let's say that they're getting 20,000, because 19,000 is the max that you can put in a MyAble account on an annual basis. But overall, the max is 100,000, but you can only do the 19,000 per year. So if someone's getting a settlement for 20,000 or 25,000, we can open a pooled trust and then again have that conversation with the beneficiary. We want them to make that decision. We want them to share their goals, how long they want this money to last. We can open a MyAble account in conjunction with the pooled trust and make reoccurring deposits to keep them on a budget. And then again, as we mentioned, anything over 400,000, I typically reach out to you. We'll look if they have any unique assets. For example, if there's a family that has an estate plan and they want to leave their child with a disability with a home to own, and that leads to so many other questions. So I appreciate your knowledge and feedback in those situations. I try to get as much information as I can. And then again, give them guidance based on their specific needs, because everyone's family and loved one it comes with a unique set of circumstances.
Sure.
Um, sorry.
Sorry, Maddie, I can see the Q&A here, so I popped it up. So one is a pool trust useful for self-employed or SSI, SSDI claimants? Absolutely.
Mhm.
Do you deal with, Kathy, with people who are, they have disabilities, but they're able to work at least, let's say, part-time, or
Absolutely, yeah.
and they're able to then kind of manage their own affairs and be able to put excess funds in there and be able to set money aside. So
Exactly, exactly. The only thing we can't do is if they're working, we can't have direct deposits into the pooled trust. Oh, and that brings up another point I want to make. There's unlimited deposits into these trust accounts. Some people have the misconception that, oh, I can make this one deposit. For first party, it's unlimited deposits, unlimited distribution requests. And one thing I wanted to add also is, we truly pride ourselves on a beneficiary approach to these trusts. I feel the world that we're living in, everything's automated. Everyone wants instant gratification. Everyone wants to do things quickly. But with our beneficiaries, they have a variety of different disabilities. Sometimes they need someone to talk to. They need someone to walk through the paper process of filling out the paperwork, mailing it to us. And that's where Jane and Nikki, our trust administrators, they're just amazing, and they're very patient, and they learn about the individual's disability and what their needs are. So I'm very proud of that we really do take the time to get to know the individual beneficiary and what they need.
So it's not super tech heavy. So if somebody is like uncomfortable with technology, or maybe doesn't have access to the internet or a computer, this is something that for people who have maybe more support needs or are uncomfortable with tech, this would be an appropriate, they get support.
Absolutely. And then with the third party trust that you had mentioned, the one caveat with the third party trust is only third party funds can be deposited into the third party trust. So I just wanted to add that. You might open the third party trust, and then the beneficiary wants to make a deposit and they can't. They would have to put it into a first party trust. So we just can't commingle those deposits.
I think that's an excellent point, because it's like poisoning the well. You can't do that. So that's something that's a big, something that I see as a point of confusion all the time with different people. And so especially family member trustees, you mentioned earlier how somebody might be over or approaching that asset limit, and they go, oh, I got to get rid of the money. And they take it and they put it in a third party trust. Now they've just kind of poisoned the well, and now it's first party money. So you can't really,
And
that's a huge no-no.
that's another level of protection. So when those third party deposits come in, I do the research to make sure that they are true third party funds.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. We do have one more question, which is, can I briefly explain why I don't like a special needs trust within a trust in an estate planning technique? Absolutely. I did a whole webinar on this. It's in a prior recording. There's a variety of reasons, but in a nutshell, a trust within a trust for somebody with known disabilities, all of the rules about how those funds are administered and who's responsible, there are different purposes. So when it's a trust within a trust, it's usually within a parent's or even a grandparent's revocable living trust. All the rules are designed for the primary beneficiaries, which are the parents, right? So there's the trustee that's named is probably not the trustee that you want or is expecting to have to administer a trust for decades. Even thinking about how you name the account becomes unclear. So when it's a standalone trust, whether it's a third-party pool trust, because there's no drafting with that, but when it's a standalone trust that you're drafting, you go through all the same drafting questions that you do on a planning side for that revocable living trust. Like, who's your trustee? Are we going to build in, like, so if you review the other, Matt, if you could put a link to my prior recording in this one, or just take a look at it. You go through the different you're not going to set up the same checks and balances that you would for mom and dad's just revocable living trust. So for a special needs trust that's custom drafted, again, we're talking about sufficient assets to warrant that. We have a trust protector, a professional trustee, and a trust advisory committee. You don't get all of that when you have a trust within a trust. So there's more to say about that, but that's in a nutshell my particular bent. So thank you everyone for joining us. Maddie, you want to do the
Yeah, say goodbye. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Kathy for joining us. It's really great and informational. This video is recorded and will be on our YouTube channel in the next couple weeks. So I'll let everyone know when that is live. And I'll also let you guys know what our next webinar is. We're still planning it out.
Yeah,
But,
if you have recommendations or if you want to hear us talk about a certain topic, please reach out, subscribe, put it in the comments, and we'll make sure that that's something that we cover. Thank you, Kathy, for taking the time to share all of your expertise with us. I'm so proud of you. I love that you're doing this. You're just knocking it out of the park.
Thank
And
you
I'm
so
so
much for
excited to work
inviting
with
me
you.
today.